Hello Bass Fanatics, Fish Den 365 here. Today we're going to talk about snaps and how I use snaps to improve my fishing. I'm going to share with you how I do that, how I use snaps, what baits I use snaps with, what baits I never use snaps with and why, and how I use snaps to help me catch more fish. But before I get too far into this, I want to give a shout out to Justin Rackley. He is Lake Fork guy, LFG. Justin's got a brain tumor. I bought this shirt, this great shirt from Justin. Justin is selling these shirts online to help fund his health care and his surgery for his brain tumor. If you'd like to find out a little bit more, you can search on LFG, Lake Fork guy, on YouTube. Find his channel and you'll see his videos there. I find his videos to be both informative and very entertaining. Along the way with this video where we talk about snaps, I'll share with you some of my favorite baits to use snaps with and how I utilize those baits and the snaps to catch more fish. So before we get too far into this, I'd like to show you the actual snap that I am using. I get this particular snap from Cabela's, and it's a very, very small duo lock snap, but I find it to be very good for my applications because it's extremely light and small. Now it doesn't come like this, it actually comes on a swivel, and it's a size 14. It's the smallest size that Cabela sells. So I'll show you what it looks like with the swivel and what I do to make it a snap. Okay, I have a couple of swivels on these snaps, and I never use the swivel part. It may make sense to use it if you are using spinners, trout fishing with spinners or something that can twist your line. The swivel would help prevent that twisting. But for my bass fishing applications, even when I'm throwing spoons, I don't use the swivel. So what I do is I just take a wire cutter, a good pair of wire cutters. I pick up the snap and I just cut the swivel part off, and these are heavy duty cutters, so it's as simple as that. I just cut that one off. I'm not sure where it flew to, somewhere on the table. Here it is. So I cut that off. You can see where I snapped it off, broke it off, and I'm left with that tiny size 14 snap, and that works very well for a number of my applications, and we'll get into that next. Got a major storm coming here, folks. It's getting really dark, so we're probably going to have to hold up this video and complete it at another time. But one thing I want to say about snaps, you know, about 30 years ago when I was a young lad, I remember watching a Bill Dance episode on TV, and he was showing crankbaits and how to fish crankbaits. And he stated that you should never use a snap or a snap swivel with the crankbait. Rather, just use the split ring that comes with the bait. And the reason for his reasoning for that was that it would throw the crankbait out of balance or out of tune. And in one of my earlier videos, I mentioned that you should always pick up your own experience and rely on your own experience to make decisions when fishing. Don't just trust what someone else tells you. And I followed my own advice with this and started using snaps quite a number of years ago. My dad had been using snaps since I was 4 years old with all of his lures, and he caught plenty of fish throughout all those years. He's 95 today and he's still fishing. And he always had time to take me fishing. For that, I'll be forever grateful. So I've been using this small snap with crankbaits and with a number of other applications, and it catches plenty of fish, and there's a lot of advantages to using the snap. So let's show you what those advantages are per bait that I like to use them on. Okay folks, so we moved into our inside studio after that huge thunderstorm had just hit, and got my lighting set up for you, and thought I'd show you a crankbait that I like to use and how it comes. It comes with this standard split ring on it, and we'll show you some split rings in a minute by themselves. This is a bait by Bill Norman called a DD22, a Norman DD22. The DD either stands for double deep or down deep, probably double deep. And the 22 means that it can go down 22 feet. Now a lot of these baits, they say there's a number that they can go to. I never got this bait down to 22 feet. However, when I throw it on light line, 8-pound test, and I make a long cast, I can certainly get it down to 16 to 18 feet deep, which is a good depth for a crankbait. Now this particular bait, I find to be very effective for deep cranking in the summer and early fall. Those are the two seasons when it really seems to shine. And it's the most effective crankbait in the summertime, deep diving crankbait that I use. It catches more for me in the summer and early fall than any other crankbait that I throw. So I really like this particular crankbait. And so this is one of the crankbaits that I use this snap on. And I leave the split ring on there, and then I just attach the snap to the split ring. So it's as simple as tying the snap to your line, connecting it to the lure like that, and now I have a snap and a split ring like that. Now why do I like that? Well, if I just tie to the split ring, I can have some problems. And I think the best way to show that to you is to show a larger size split ring. I'm going to change the angle on this in a minute and show a close-up of this split ring and describe to you why I don't like just using a split ring without the snap and what the snap does to make it a little bit better. Okay folks, so here you can see I have a close-up of the split ring, and this is why I don't like tying directly to it. You can see that there's these points on here. This is how you get a split ring onto a lure. You use a split ring pliers or just a regular pliers, and you spread that part open and then slide it on and just turn it in a circle and it goes on. The problem with this is when you tie a line to here, let's say you tie that line right here. Let me use the scissors here to point what I'm talking to. So let's say you tie the line right here. The problem is that knot can start to slip around, and eventually, if you're not careful, it can slip to where the split in the ring is, right here. And if it does that, it could get, the knot can start getting hooked up in here. It could actually get in between the split ring, and it could weaken the knot. And over time, you can have a broken line, a broken knot as a result. So the manufacturers actually realized this some number of years ago, and they started utilizing an oval split ring design. See the difference on this bait? It came with an oval design. So that is supposed to make that less likely to happen. You tie the line on one end of the oval or the other, and then it's less likely to be into the split part. I think it can still happen even on the oval split rings, and I've found that using the snap on the split ring gives me some advantages too. So now I remove the disadvantage of having the problem where the knot can get caught up into that split part, and by having the snap on there, this gives me some nicer action to the bait. So two big advantages right away. Number one, if I want to change this bait, it's very simple. I don't have to cut and retie. I can just undo that snap, pull the bait off, and put another bait on. Saves me a ton of time if I want to change baits. The other way to do that is to just have several rods rigged up with all the different baits that you think you're going to be using that day. But not all of us can afford having 100 rods in the boat, and so it's nice to be able to use a snap to quickly change baits. One big advantage there. The second big advantage is that when you're throwing a crankbait especially, you want that bait to have an erratic action. They call it hunting. It finds its way back to center, but as it's moving, as this bait is moving through the water, you actually want it to go off to one side and then maybe off to the other and then find its way back to center. And by having that snap on there, it gives you much more play between the bait and your line. And so I think it gives the bait a little bit better action. It allows the bait more freedom of movement as it's going through the water, and it can give you that type of action where the bait goes off center slightly. And oftentimes that's what triggers strikes. So having a snap on there gives me an advantage that way too. So now you know I like to use these snaps on crankbaits, number one. Now one thing before we go any further is I always change the hooks on my baits on any of these type of hard-bodied lures with treble hooks. I use Kamagatsu EWG, that stands for extra wide gap treble hooks. These are size 2. I often use size 4, and I also use size 6 depending on the size of the bait. I like to use the biggest hook I can get away with when I'm fishing for bass, because when you get a hook up with a bigger hook, you're more likely to retain that fish, and it's more likely to hold the fish through the fight and get him to the boat or to the bank, depending on how you're fishing. So Gamakatsu EWGs, these extra wide gap hooks are actually bent inwards slightly, and so when a fish grabs them and you set the hook, it holds much better. And that's the advantage of this particular hook. Now, some people don't like EWGs because if the fish just swipes at the bait and doesn't eat the bait and doesn't take it all the way, oftentimes they claim that the hooks won't get into the fish's flesh or fish's mouth that way. But my thinking on it is this: I don't want fish swiping at the bait. If they're swiping at the bait, there's something not quite right with my presentation. I'd rather change the size, change the color, figure out what's wrong with the presentation so that the fish grab it fully and take and then know that I have the right presentation and catch those fish, rather than have fish swipe at the bait and hope that I hook them. Because even with round bend hooks that aren't bent inward like that, even with those hooks, when fish swipe at the bait, oftentimes they come off because they don't get the hook in their mouth very well. So it's better, in my opinion, to figure out the presentation that gets them to fully eat the bait. And with these hooks, they're not coming off. A couple other baits to show you. This is a jerk bait. This is a Lucky Craft jerk bait. It's a slender pointer, and the length of this bait is 97 millimeters. So this is called a Pointer 97 MR. So it's a more slender design of a jerk bait, and I fish a snap with this bait as well. I leave the split ring on there, and I just put the snap right on the split ring. And what that does is allows me to get a really good action out of the jerk bait. Now, when you're fishing jerk baits, the reason why they call them jerk baits is you're constantly working the rod to try and get the bait to do very erratic action. You want it splitting off this way, then rolling back this way, then going this way, and then you pause. And so that's the action that works best with a jerk bait. By the way, every one of the baits that I'm talking about here and all the products that I talk about, I will put a link in the description to this video so that you can find out where you can get them. And if you're interested in buying these products, then the link will be there for you. Here's another jerk bait. This is a Rapala Shadow Rap, and this one is another type of jerk bait that I like to throw. Again, I use the snap on this one also. I use the split ring. I just put the snap on the split ring. Little bit of a different action than the pointer. Some of the Rapalas will slowly sink. This one, I believe, is a slow riser. You jerk it down and then it just rises very slowly, and sometimes that triggers the bite. So I also use snaps when I'm throwing a spinnerbait, and sometimes spinnerbaits have a closed gap here. You can see this particular spinnerbait is an R-style bend, but I did something with it that allows me to use a snap. I took a heat shrink tubing, cut a small piece, put it over there, and shrunk it on there. I'm going to hold this closer to the camera. Hopefully you'll be able to see that, especially with my white shirt as being a background, and if not, we'll redo this so that you can see it. So now I can put a snap on that, and in a minute I'll show you how I do that. The other thing you'll notice, this is a Nichols Spinnerbait, and I like the Nichols type spinnerbaits. Notice too, I have a trailer hook on this, so if I'm not fishing around heavy cover, I always use a trailer hook on my spinnerbaits. And there's a good way and what I think is a bad way to put the trailer hook on. I like to use a piece of surgical tubing. I put the trailer hook on first, and I put the tubing on after it. And so the trailer hook, let me make sure I can get this so that you can see it, will float freely behind the hook. And that's what you want. You don't want to have this thing, this way the bait is much more balanced and it works much better. Sometimes people will put the surgical tubing over this hook and then put it on. And what that does is it keeps the hook in a rigid position, straight out like this. But if it bumps some cover, the next thing you know, that position could be this way or it could be this way, throws the bait off balance. If a fish hits it, he might miss that back hook. These trailer hooks are important when you're fishing spinner baits because oftentimes the fish will short hit the bait, and having that trailer hook can allow you to get a good hookup on your fish. So that's why I like to use a trailer hook. But again, I'll use a snap when I'm using spinner baits, and I use that heat shrink tubing to allow me to do that. Okay folks, so I have here a buzzbait. This is a Lee Bailey Cavitron buzzbait. I think a company called Mega Strike carries this bait now, and I'll put this in the description so that you can take a look at this bait. This is one of my favorite buzzbaits to fish. If you notice, there's actually holes in the blade here, and that allows a couple of things. It's easier to get the buzzbait to rise to the top. It's lighter as a result. The whole thing rises as soon as you start retrieving, and that's important because for buzzbait fishing, you want to be able to fish it along the surface slowly. You can fish it fast, but the slower you can retrieve it, the better the buzzbait generally is, because you could always fish it fast, but not all buzzbaits can be fished very slowly. This one can, and it has a very good action on the blade. It's got that ringing noise, and that ringing sound is really what you want. You can make it even a little bit better still by taking this rivet that's on here and taking a pliers and pushing it up the back here, and then taking that pliers and crimping it down. That makes more friction between that rivet and that blade, and it'll actually make that ringing sound even louder. And that is key to buzzbait fishing. It's that special sound that the blade makes really seems to attract the bass, and this Cavitron is one of the best I've thrown. I really like this bait. You notice this bait is got this R shape on it also, and I like to use a snap sometimes with buzzbaits. Now if I'm throwing a buzzbait in really heavy cover, lots of thick weeds and grass and that kind of thing, then I will tie directly to the buzzbait. But there are times when I'll throw this in sparse cover or even in open water, and when I do that, I like to use a snap. So the way I do that, the thing that allows me to do that is I take a piece of heat shrink tubing and I just cut a small piece off. And then I'll slide that over my buzzbait. And then I'll take, in this particular case, a heat gun, and I'll just turn this on and blow that until the heat causes that tubing to shrink right in place. You could also use a lighter if you don't have a heat gun, but let's quick do this. I'll show you how this works. And that's all there is to it. It's shrunk on there, a little warm yet, but once that cools, that will not slide. It's shrunk on very strong, and I can put my snap on there. Like so. Hook it up, and I'm ready to go fishing with my buzzbait and my snap. And it allows me to change buzzbaits. I do this with a lot of the buzzbaits that I own, so that they're ready to go, and I can just change, if I need to change the color or the size, I can do it very quickly just by releasing the snap and putting a different buzzbait on. So that's a nice little hack for you, a nice little trick that allows you to use spinnerbaits and buzzbaits with using a snap, using heat shrink tubing. Let's talk about some other topwater lures. This one is a Rebel Super Pop R. Great bait. Again, I change the hooks. I use the EWGs, and I tie a feather hook on the tail. Just gives it a little bit more action. The popper type baits, oftentimes the bait gets hit while it's sitting still on the surface, and having these feather tails, the feathers, just the slightest, you don't even need to move the bait, and they undulate slightly, so it looks like a living thing. Might look like a tail or a fin moving, and I think sometimes it attracts more strikes. So this is a popper style of bait, and generally I will tie directly onto this. I will not use a snap onto this bait, and they come this way. They don't come with a split ring on them because they're really not meant to have a split ring. Now this is a bait that is meant to be a walk dog bait. This is a Lucky Craft Sammy 100. The 100 means it's 100 millimeters long, and this bait is weighted so that when it sits in the water, it actually sits at this angle, at this attitude in the water. And it does not come with a split ring, and I don't put a split ring on it. However, I always use a snap when I'm fishing a Sammy. It just allows that action to be a little bit more pronounced side to side. And so watch this video and you can see what the walk the dog action looks like. Here's one more bait that I like a whole lot. I don't see a lot of people fishing this bait. This is called a Norman Top Dollar. And this is kind of like a hybrid bait in that you can walk the dog with it, but it also pops and spits water real well. The thing I like a lot about this bait is that it's shaped a lot like a shad. Notice that the bait is very thin. It's not very thick. It's got a very different kind of profile. And the profile matches that of forage fish very well. It matches that of a shad or an alewife or a bluegill, and I find this bait to be very effective. It's one of my favorite topwater bait. It probably is my favorite topwater bait. There's not many of them out there. They're still available though. I just don't see many people fishing them, so it's been kind of a secret for me to be throwing this bait. A few of my buddies like it too because they know how good it can be. It is a very good bait. This is a bait that does not come with a split ring. I do use a snap with this. I use that same small snap that I'm using for all the other baits. It does not adversely affect the action of the bait. This bait I'll call a hybrid in that you can walk the dog with it, but it also spits and splashes and makes quite a bit of commotion with that front face design. And so here's a video that shows how this works on the water. Here's another situation where I like to use a snap. If I'm fishing a swimming jig like this is a little swim bait on a jig head. I like to use a snap for those too. As long as I'm not fishing around real heavy cover, I'll use a snap for this. And the reason why is I get a little more action out of the bait by using a snap. When this tail is thumping through the water, that vibrates this bait, and by having this snap on here, just imagine if this line was tied directly to the head of the ball head of this jig. It would be tied directly to that. There'd be no real play between the line and the jig head. But by having this snap, I have some play between where the line is and where the jig head is. And so when that tail is throbbing and moving through the water, this whole bait actually can wiggle a little bit back and forth. It'll have this wobbling motion. And that, I believe, results in more strikes. And so that's why I'll use a snap when I'm using a swim jig like this through sparse cover. The other nice thing about having a snap like this on a bait like this is I can quickly change it. I can change the style of the bait, maybe to a curly tail grub, or the size of the bait. Having that snap allows me to change it very quickly. So you might be wondering, when do I not use a snap? Well, there's a lot of situations where a snap is not appropriate. And usually that has to do with fishing heavy cover. So when I'm fishing a Texas rig like this beaver, certainly wouldn't want to snap for this situation. You're throwing this into wood, you're throwing this into weeds, all kinds of heavy type of cover. Here's another bait where I would never use a snap. Again, throwing into heavy cover is a jig. So any type of jig. This has a brush guard here for when you're fishing in wood cover. Also, this could be thrown in weeds or rock. Would not use a snap on this. And here's another example of topwater toad. This gets fished in a lot of heavy cover on top what I call topwater slop. It could be milfoil, lily pads, any type of weed like that, hydrilla. So here's a topwater toad, not using a snap there either. So I hope this tutorial on using snaps has been helpful to you. And if you have any questions, please ask. And if you like this video, hit that like button. Please subscribe to my channel. I'll be putting out more and more videos, at least one a week. And I look forward to doing the next one. And again, any questions on anything that we went over today, please comment, ask the question, and I'll do whatever I can to get back to you quickly. May God bless your fishing endeavors.